Now everybody knows Michael Jordan is the GOAT, but they may not know his arch rival, Isiah Thomas, was one of the best players in the league when he did play. He was in the MVP voting a couple of times, and he was very impactful. So let's talk about it in Covering Sports. Now, prior to Michael Jordan being drafted, it's arguable that Isiah Thomas was the most popular player in Chicago or from Chicago. He pretty much was the face of Chicago, how Derrick Rose is the face now. Isiah Thomas was the face back then. He was drafted 3 years before Michael Jordan, so he came in with Mark Aguirre, who was also from Chicago, and I believe they're from the same neighborhood actually, and they're childhood friends. But they came in together as the number 1 and 2 pick together to renew the league at a time where it was down. The finals were tape delayed, and it wasn't really the event, and it wasn't this massive brand that it is now. The NBA needed to grow, so they came in at a time where Magic and Larry had just been in the league 2 years, and they represented the new wave of players who were going to be the face of the 80s basketball, and who knew they would be this legendary. But Isiah Thomas was the guy before Michael Jordan came in and took the popularity away from him in more ways than one. But some people forget that Isiah Thomas is from Chicago. Not only is he from Chicago, but he's from the west side of Chicago where the Bulls played. That's where the arena was. So it's kind of trippy when you think about how from the initial point of them having this connection, Isiah being from Chicago, Michael Jordan being drafted to Chicago and becoming everything to the NBA, it took away from Isiah Thomas's love from the city, and I think that put a chip on his shoulder from the beginning. And a lot of younger fans may not even know that the Pistons were just as instrumental as the Celtics and the Lakers in the 80s when it came to renewing the league's brand and actually creating something powerful. But they got like a stepchild treatment when it came to being celebrated, as the Lakers and the Celtics are the team of the 80s. Everybody knows about their legendary finals matchups. They had some of the highest ratings, but what a lot of people don't know is the Pistons have some of the highest rated games with just them going against the Bulls or going against the Celtics. If you look it up, they have some of the highest matchups ever, especially during that time when basketball was back on the rise, as it was recovering from that 70s era where it was a time of parity and all these teams weren't in championships, but they didn't have a true face. You did have Dr. J, but the brand wasn't as strong as it became in the 80s. And the Pistons helped that. You know, they were a defensive team, but prior to being a defensive team, they scored a lot of points. They just put a lot of points on the board, and they had to adjust their playing style to become the champions we know them as, or some people know them as, but they never got the celebration or the highlight that the Celtics got and the Lakers got. And that may be due to Isiah Thomas not being as popular amongst his peers in the NBA and the journalists, the journalists of the time. It may be due to that. But when you think of the 80s, don't ever forget about the Pistons, the bad boy Pistons, whatever you want to call them, because they were just as important as the Celtics and the Lakers. And they even won championships in the 80s too. And a lot of people may not know that the Pistons were also a team on the rise in the 80s. If you look at it, they started to rise to prominence in about 1985, 1986 when they became really good as a team. And they are known for winning 2 championships somewhat in the late 80s and becoming a storied franchise, but not as storied as the Celtics and the Lakers. Most people recognize the bad boy Pistons from that clip where they're walking off the court after they lost to the Bulls. But what a lot of people don't know is prior to losing that matchup against the Bulls, they beat them 3 times. They beat them in the semifinals and twice in the conference finals. And prior to the bad boy Pistons, whooping the Bulls, which is my team, the Celtics beat them twice. So the Celtics eliminated the Bulls twice and the Pistons eliminated them 3 times. But for some reason, the Celtics isn't as highlighted when it comes to being a Bulls rival. And I don't really understand why. Maybe that's a media thing. But if you look at it, the Celtics beat them back to back and then the Pistons beat them 3 times. But I guess because of media narrative and the Jordan rules also, where the Pistons were playing Jordan pretty hard, but it was part of the times. It was aggressive style of defense and anything went when it came to playing defense on the court. But the Pistons were that thorn when it came to the Bulls reaching the finals, and they were the up and coming team. The Pistons were up and coming, and in the late 80s or the mid to late 80s, these were 2 teams battling it out. And due to Michael Jordan being the popular up and coming face of the league who was going to replace Larry and Magic, it seemed like everybody went against the Pistons because of how they played defense and I guess how they treated Michael Jordan, but it was all in the game, and the Celtics experienced the same things from the Pistons. So when you're thinking about the 80s, don't forget that not only did the Celtics eliminate the Bulls a couple of times, but the Pistons were really giving the Bulls hell in every way possible. And with Michael Jordan and Isiah Thomas having this rivalry, a lot of people attribute the beginning of the rivalry to the 1985 All-Star game, in which it was said that Michael Jordan was froze out, of the offense. They weren't passing him the ball, and it was due to him possibly being, this arrogant, young, flashy player with the gold chains, the Nike endorsement. He probably thought he was a hot, commodity, and he was. You could call it self-awareness or you could call it arrogance, but maybe there's a thin line, and that rubbed a lot of the vets wrong who were in the league for a long time and didn't get that treatment or didn't get those endorsements and that branding that made Michael Jordan Air Jordan and the star that we know him as. So in that All-Star game, if you watch, they weren't passing the ball to Michael Jordan a lot, and it would seem like they were trying to show him where his place was in the league, as he didn't win anything. In 1985, he had just came in the year before, and it was just his rookie year All-Star game, and a lot of vets probably jealous and looked at that as, who does this guy think he is, and they treated him as such on the court. But a lot of people deny it. Some players say it's real, but Isiah Thomas is one of those players who obviously denies freezing out Michael Jordan and says he never had a problem with him. But with rivalries, you never know. But a lot of people attribute it to that 1985 All-Star game, and that's when the Bulls and the Pistons were bound to be rivals, as the two faces of the teams just really didn't like each other. Now, you could call it a coincidence, or you can call it karma as to why when 1992 came, Isiah Thomas was left off the Olympic team. Now, in hindsight, it came out that a lot of players just weren't a fan of Isiah Thomas. Maybe it was his personality, maybe it was the team he played for, but it was strange as the Pistons head coached the Olympic team. So it didn't really make sense, but it could be due to the fact that Scottie Pippen, Magic Johnson at the time, and Michael Jordan just didn't get along with Isiah Thomas, and Larry Bird, if you want to throw Larry in there. It was a lot of players, Karl Malone, a lot of these guys, Charles Barkley. I don't know how John Stockton felt, but they just had something against Isiah Thomas. Maybe it was his attitude. Maybe they felt like he played innocent because he was known as the babyface assassin. But the babyface assassin, and he'd do dirty plays and elbow people and do little things that the refs didn't catch. So when that time came for them to shine on that global stage in the Olympics, a lot of people didn't want to play with Isiah Thomas, most vocal being Scottie Pippen. And then, of course, Michael Jordan, he didn't want him on the team. Magic and Isiah Thomas weren't seeing eye to eye at the time, so it was a lot of people who just said nay to him being on that roster, and that spoke volumes, as Isiah Thomas was one of the greatest players of the 80s. He averaged 20 and 10. He was in the MVP voting a couple of times. And prior to Michael Jordan becoming the guy, he was actually the up and coming rising star of the Eastern Conference in the 1980s. So for him to not even get a roster spot on the 1992 Olympic team, known as the Dream Team, it spoke about how players in the league viewed him, felt about him, how they didn't want to really associate with him. And maybe it just was him being this controversial figure with the Bad Boy Pistons and the Dennis Rodman remarks that he made about Larry Bird being a white player and him being more celebrated than other players because he's white. It could be a multitude of things, but him being left off the Olympic team pretty much sums up why he was the greatest rival of Michael Jordan and possibly the greatest rival the NBA has ever known when it comes to being a villain. And due to Isiah Thomas being this dominant point guard who played on a team that was very rough and tough, played hard-nosed defense, and they won 2 championships to, conclude the 80s, a lot of people feel like, being that they had to go through the legendary Celtics, beat the legendary Lakers in the finals, and they had to dismantle the Bulls prior to becoming these championship teams, that created this divide in journalism, or created this perspective in which they were just this villainous team. They beat the Celtics, they beat the Lakers, they beat the Bulls, and that's not talked about enough when you really look at how celebrated these 3 teams are. The Bulls, the Lakers, and Celtics of the 80s and 90s. The Bulls of the 90s at least. These are very celebrated teams, and they're always talked about, and the Pistons are always left out, even though they beat all three of these teams, had highly rated games, and they were led by a great point guard who might have been the second best point guard in the league outside of Magic Johnson. You can put John Stockton in there, but I would put Isiah Thomas at 2, as offensively he was just more skilled. But of course, John Stockton was more of a traditional point guard, and he was killing it. His records are crazy to this day, but being that Isiah Thomas was the face of a controversial team, even though he was a great player, came in 1981 and pretty much played the whole 80s decade, he just didn't get the love. And I think that speaks to when a player plays, they should try to keep their relationships good, positive, and strong, because when they leave the game or time comes where they have to join their peers and do something great, they'll be left out. So it's a testament to keeping your relationships good, because even if your game is good but your reputation is not, it can ruin your legacy. And I don't think Isiah Thomas's legacy is ruined, but it's not as grand as it could be. But that's what I have. Michael Jordan's rival. Isiah Thomas was one of the greatest players ever, but because of, his reputation amongst his peers and the journalists of the time, he didn't get the love. But that's what I have for Isiah Thomas. That's what I have for today. Like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content. Got more on the way. Peace.